Lakshmi and I have been serving together for so long now. It doesn't take much. I look to the table at my left. She does like this. I say yes. She goes and gets the glasses. Who would have known? She watches me stand up and the music stand appears. It's lovely, actually, to feel so much in tune, because the in-tunement is really based on, and of course, this is not singularly with Lakshmi and I, but when we're all serving in the name of the same, of course, one God, but our gurus as well, so that the vibration is what we're attuning ourselves to, then it's not a surprise. The dance becomes effortless and quite beautiful, really. This is a beautiful reading, and at the surface of it, like so many, it looks so simple. And it's one of those readings that you could think, what am I going to say this year? What am I going to say this year? Because the lesson seems so obvious, and I actually have the words here because I want to read parts of it to you again. But I thought yesterday, as I read it, there's probably 6 wonderful talks that could be given from this reading. And while they all come together, and maybe we'll get to a little bit of that today, there are so many meaningful points that Jesus certainly was making, that Krishna was making in those readings that we do. And then the way Swami Kriyananda manages to explain these readings in just a couple of little paragraphs, and very often bring so many aspects of any spiritual path. These are just truth. They're not only relevant to this particular path, but really speaking from that pure wisdom, from the pure love of any of the avatars, that whoever is sitting here today could take away so much depth and meaning, certainly about service. And I'm not going to speak directly about service today, but I love this affirmation. Some of you in here, I think, have sat in on some of the classes that we've been doing. They're called satsang with Shanti, and they really are a satsang. We come and we talk. After I usually give a little talk, but because they're the essentials on the spiritual path, of course, service came up pretty quickly. Swami Kriyananda said an interesting thing about service. I don't have the quote right here, so I can't say it, but it was very much like this. He was talking about service and meditation, which are 2 of the primary ways that we think of as people realizing their own divine consciousness, certainly with meditation, and maybe in the end, meditation's a must. But service as well, because, as Swamiji says here, I'll read it to you, when we're serving, if we are remembering to serve the God in each other, if we're remembering to do that, it takes us so far outside of ourselves, we actually forget ourselves, which is, after all, the whole point of the spiritual path, is to move from this place of self-realization to self-realization, to the realization of the divine within us and within everyone. And Swamiji actually said something like this. He said, of course, meditation is important. Of course it is. But he said, I have noticed that when people serve a great deal, there's an energy, an uplifted, heartfelt, soul-inspiring energy that comes through them that can often be missing in people who simply, I'll use that word, I doubt he did, but simply meditate for hours a day. So there's something about serving and serving with right attitude, which is more what I'd like to speak about today, another aspect of the reading that's pretty clear, that opens our heart, that really takes us right to the heart and soul of the divine. Maybe I'll get back to this. I just had another thought that superseded that. This reading always comes up every year right around the time of Rajarsi Janakananda's birthday. Rajarsi, as many of you know, but for anybody new who's with us, was the most highly evolved male disciple that Yogananda had. He and Yogananda were very, very close. Of course, because they were often together in God. They were moving in and out of that place of samadhi. And needless to say, they were leaving most of the other disciples somewhere else. Most of the other disciples were not always in samadhi. But they had a lovely relationship, one of deep, deep respect of Rajarsi for Yogananda. In fact, there's that very sweet story when either Master or Rajarsi was speaking about the spiritual heights and depths and expansiveness of Rajarsi's life. And Master said to him, "Now don't forget who took you there." And Rajarsi, who was a self-made multi-millionaire, which, as Lakshmi was saying to a group yesterday, in today's terms is a multi-billionaire. It was a lot of money then. And he started from nothing. And he started one business after another. And he became a real tycoon in the business world in many areas. So this big man who would take off sometimes for 6 months at a time, he couldn't get back to be with his guru because work was demanding. Now remember, he never left his guru. They were always together in spirit. So it would be different if we said that about anybody else. But that's how much time and energy and effort he put into his work to become who he was in the world. And Master said, "Now don't forget who's made you this way." And Rajarsi looked at him and said, "I won't, Master. I know it was all you." Just like this little boy. So they're not just like he was a little boy next to Master, but it was so precious. They're just strolling the grounds and you could find them sitting, and there's images of it on those beautiful hillsides at the Encinitas Hermitage. And Yogananda would say, "Shh, don't disturb him." He said, when somebody this evolved is meditating, it brings great blessing to everyone here. And even that his vibration would still be there as much as Yogananda's is. When we visit those places, you can feel Rajarsi there too. Now, why am I saying all this? Because his birthday was a couple of days ago, and his entire life was about serving God in this form of Yogananda. He probably single-handedly had very much to do with, from a physical plane, monetary point of view, the success of Self-Realization Fellowship, because he just poured almost all of the money that he made into SRF. In fact, Yogananda would call him and tell him, "We need this much more, we need that much more." So everything he did, whether he was meditating with Yogananda or working to be able to support Yogananda's teachings, to spread them throughout this country, throughout the world, it was always singularly with Yogananda. No matter where he was or what he was doing, his entire life was in the presence of God. So his birthday was a couple of days ago, and we typically have once a year. We've had to miss it recently because the pandemic was here for a couple of years, but we have what we call a Rajasi Day. They do it all over the world at the Ananda communities, where people come together and they serve, and they spend much of the day serving. So yesterday, and the reading comes up. This reading happens to, I have no idea. I wish Swamiji were here so I could ask him, did you put this right near Rajasi's birthday? Right around the time of both Rajasi's birthday every year and Mother's Day. Mother's Day happens to be next week, but often the reading's even closer to Mother's Day, depending on how it falls. And here we have two examples of pure, divinely loving, selfless service. Rajasi and mothers. I mean, it's just so beautiful that we get to think of that with this reading and see what Jesus, through these examples, was saying to Martha. He wasn't saying to Martha, as Swamiji said, and I'll read just this part of the reading again. He says, this is Swamiji's explanation. He says, but this teaching here doesn't concern the obvious dilemma of devotees to work for God, which Rajasi was doing, of course. Mary was sitting at God's feet and just absorbing his teachings. Martha in the kitchen working for God. She could have been, she wasn't, which is the whole point of the reading, or to spend one's time in prayer. So is it better for those of us who have our professional life, if you will, allow us to be serving Ananda full-time versus being a doctor full-time or working in Silicon Valley full-time? Is it better if we're serving God directly like that all the time, or to spend one's time in prayer? He says, it concerns rather the attitude of the mind, which is so important. But then he goes on, I won't come back to that, but he says, he didn't say to Martha, Swamiji says this in the reading, but I know it's hard to hold on to it, so I'm repeating it for you. He didn't say to her, Martha, you're doing too much. He didn't say that. We all work hard when we're serving God. In any way, we work very hard, very long hours. But he says, rather, he told her, you're letting your work affect your inner peace. And that was the contrast, not work versus contemplation, but restless preoccupation versus peaceful absorption under all circumstances. And this is what Rajasi knew. He was always at peace. Wherever he was serving his guru. It didn't matter if he was running an insurance company or the railroad, or if he was sitting in Samadhi on one of the SRF properties. He was always just the same, serving his guru, serving God. And that is the point of what Jesus is saying to Martha. Here was Martha doing something as simple as slicing and dicing. That's what she was doing. She was cooking. And somebody needed to cook. Somebody needed to serve. I mean, God himself walks into your house. You want to have some food for him. That was not the problem. But he was saying to her, as simple as that activity is, as simple as slicing vegetables are, if you do it with your consciousness steeped in God, you could have been reaping the same spiritual rewards as your sister was. It's not that the jobs were different, it's that your attitude was different. And very much like it says in the affirmation, and I won't go back there now, whenever we're doing something with restless preoccupation or with our emotions out front, the very energy of that keeps God away. God cannot find us through that restlessness. That story of Babaji when he appeared to Sri Yukteswar. And Sri Yukteswar was like, stay right here, stay right here. I have to run home and get some prasad for you. He wanted to bring his guru something, his teacher. Actually, it's Param Guru, but he was Babaji, so everybody's guru. And Babaji was saying, I don't need anything. Don't leave. Stay with me. But Sri Yukteswar took off. And what did Babaji do? He disappeared. And he said to him, that saying that I can never pull out of the ether, I wish I could, but in a way it doesn't matter. He said, you were so restless, I couldn't be in your presence, even though he thought he was going to get prasad for his guru. That restlessness, that activity, that outward focus precludes the possibility of God coming to us. I was thinking this morning when we were doing the purification, we have that line that we say, the light bearer, just acting as channels for these masters, say to everyone who comes up, the person comes up and says, I seek purification by the grace of God. Very powerful to be willing to be down on your knees and saying, I seek purification. It's humbling in front of God to do that. Then the light bearer says, the master says, open your heart to me and I will enter and take charge of your life. And it came to me in a way that it hadn't before, that it's not just be here and be willing. It's very much what Jesus was saying. Opening our heart means finding ourselves in love, resting in that love. You open the door to that chakra, that place in you where my love resides, and you will find me there. I will enter. I will take charge of your life. Now that happens to frighten a lot of people, so people think, I don't want to open my heart. I don't want anybody taking charge of my life. I know it. People have told me that. But the other part of that is, if we open our hearts, if we realize God's loving presence there, then God can be one with us. But if we're up here and we're on our knees, but we're thinking about where we have to go after church, how long can we stay, what did we do last night, what do we need to do tonight, albeit we're on our knees and we've just said the right words, but then that restlessness precludes God's entering. So when the masters say those words to us, open your heart so I can enter. Let us be together in love. It's such a beautiful coming together in that moment if we can be present. And again, speaking to that part of this reading that says it doesn't matter what we do. It doesn't matter at all. We can be out there doing what looks to the world like the best service. Everything from the occupation that we have to parenting to showing up in church, whatever we're doing and everything we're doing, if we're not doing it in the consciousness of God, then the gift that we can receive is markedly diminished, if not negated. We have to keep trying, which is why it's so wonderful that this reading comes up every year. And it comes up right around Roger C's birthday. So yesterday, there were probably 30 people here. I wasn't actually with them the whole time, but I was kind of in and out and just peering at them. And then this morning I came and I made rounds. I went to all the places where everybody had served. And what I felt and what the people who wrote notes about it last night were sharing on these emails was not, oh, wow, the basement looks so gorgeous. It does. Or that paper closet that we've been talking about cleaning up for 4 years. 4 years. Wow, I want to just take everybody and show you the paper closet. But that wasn't the point. Everybody was talking about everybody. And you could feel it when you came out. And you feel it in the basement and in the paper closet. And in here, for that matter, you feel the joy that comes when we're serving God. And then when we're serving God together, there was no question in anybody's mind, what am I going to get back for this? How am I going to be repaid? Oh, I can't wait to say to somebody, look at what I did. No, there was none of that. There was singing, hearts were open, people's eyes were filled with love. They were really dancing around here. And there were a lot of different people there who have many different roles in the world. It doesn't matter what our job is. It doesn't matter how many degrees we have. Nothing. I could go on and on. What matters is, can we look at what's coming through us, whether we're making flowers or vacuuming the floor or slicing and dicing or listening to somebody's heart through a stethoscope, or, it doesn't matter. Whatever it is, it's simply a beautiful opportunity brought to us through the grace of God to allow us to find a path to get closer to God. That is all anything we ever do in our lives is about. We have one purpose in this life, to get closer and closer. What does that mean, find God? What does it mean to find God? Because the mind would have us out looking, and that's the problem. No, finding God means experiencing that love. Everybody who came here and served yesterday, and I see many of you, don't do this, but if I had you all raise your hand and just give me a nod, and I said, did you feel closer to God yesterday than perhaps you felt in a long time? People's heads would be shaking. You could see it. And what were they doing? They were cleaning out refrigerators that hadn't been cleaned in too long. They were, as I said, dusting. I'm not going to get too graphic here, but lest you run screaming from the church. It's never that bad. But, it's like spring cleaning, except it's Rajasi Day. In other words, it could have been a miserable task, but it was a joyful task. And what's the difference here? there's two things that makes a difference. One is the remembering as often as we can, reminding ourselves, look at that beautiful floral arrangement that God made. Wow, look how clean God got those windowsills yesterday. Look at this extraordinary diagnosis that God came up with that I wouldn't have known. Whatever it is that you do, look at how beautifully God is taking care of our children, not my children. That's where we go wrong. That's where we live with fear. That's where we want to start controlling everything. But when you know that you have God, God has your back all the time, no, you don't live with that fear. Master and Swamiji both talk about right attitude. This is right attitude that we're talking about. And I put so many quotes here because I wanted you to hear how they say it. Now, I'm not going to be able to look and quote them. It would be too sidetracking. Though I always bring notes. I always think I'm going to do that, but I rarely can. But both Master and Swamiji say that no matter how good the work is that you're doing, whether you're serving at the Sangha or you're serving anywhere else in the world, no matter how good the work is that you do, these are now Master's words, it's nearly valueless in terms of your spiritual growth if it's not done with right attitude. And they say you could be practicing yoga, hatha yoga, every day of your life. You could be sitting cross-legged for hours a day. You could be doing the greatest work, and maybe you even got there through right attitude. But if your attitude slips, all of the spiritual value in what we're doing slips. It's not what we're creating in the world. Would that meal taste better with Martha's energy being upset, angry, not just angry at her sister, mind you, she was angry at God himself. Why are you not telling my sister to help me? That's the vibration that she was working in. Or could she have cut up some beautiful fruits and realizing right from the kitchen that she was as close to God as Mary was, who was sitting at his feet? Now, as Swamiji says in, I don't think this reading, but more expansive commentary on this, we don't really know all of what Jesus said to Martha. We know he said these wonderful words, these words that one thing is needful, and Mary hath chosen that true path which shall not be taken away from her. When you are there with your heart open to God, heart to heart, no matter what happens, nobody can take that away from you. Lots could happen to the meal itself, but if your heart's open while you're cooking the meal, if you're doing your very best to remember God moment by moment, not even just, I offer this to you, but this is God serving God. It takes the I, it takes the contractive part of the human condition. It destroys the ego, God serving God. There's no room for ego. That is right attitude. And with right attitude, Master says at one point, I started to say it, people could be practicing some of these techniques every day, all day. If their attitude is not right, it's not serving them. And maybe somebody sits down in the midst of a very different life and meditates for 20 minutes a day, but remembers to basically be bowing to the divine in everything they do, they make much more spiritual progress, much more. So the real lesson is such a simple one. And again, the classes, we did 3 classes on right attitude alone, and we could have gone on. We did 3 classes on seva or service. In that little course, we could have gone on. There's a lot to say. There are many ways that we can inspire ourselves to hold those concepts. But the bottom line of the message here is whatever you're doing in the world, find ways to remind yourself that God is always working through you, and give God credit for that, and you're always serving God in everyone else, all the time, no matter what. Somebody was talking to me yesterday about what they were calling irrational anger that they were feeling. I assured them it wasn't so irrational, other than everything about the ego always is, but just considering that they were a human being, I said many humans would have felt that, including myself. But when we were looking for what are the antidotes to those feelings that we have, that we don't want to have, and if we're honest, we all have them, whether it's a little jealousy, a little anger, a little greed, a little judgmentalness. As Master says, the best time to neutralize a feeling or a thought is the instant you think of it. So in this discussion, which looked like it was for that other person, but I was reaping a lot of rewards from it too, the point is, the minute you start feeling that anger, or what Sri Yukteswar would call a meanness of the heart, one of the meannesses, there are many, immediately change your vision. Think about the person you're angry with. Oh, how could I be angry at you? You're God himself. And mentally bow at their feet. Mentally open your heart to theirs. You cannot hold those same feelings in the heart at the same time. You cannot be loving and truly loving and angry at the same time. You cannot be judgmental and divinely loving at the same time. So step by step, we take the lesson that Jesus was giving to Martha. And when he said to her those beautiful words, you're careful and troubled about many things. We don't need to be careful and troubled. God's right with us. And no matter what we're doing, we'll love it, we'll enjoy it, we'll bring more divine presence into the world. We will be serving our own spiritual path and that of everyone around us if we remember God, God, God.
Lord Most High, our Heavenly Father, all our lives we dedicate to Thee. All our labors, all our joys and woes, all our pleasure, all our melody. Make us each a channel of Thy peace. When in darkness, guide us from above. Where there's sorrow, may we sow Thy joy. Where there's hatred,